Hey, is that power or what? I really like the meetings, where they have these huge screens and you're standing there talking and there's this great big person up there talking. It does something for you. Probably the wrong thing. Well, it's wonderful to be here, and I thank you for coming. What I wonder is if we could put up, Leroy, that song that we just sang. The words, and if it's possible, I wish we could sing that every week, because it's just really right on, and the change on the inside is what we're talking about. And what I want to say to you is that this is something that is possible, that it is accessible, that it comes to us from God. And the way to really see change, the way to heal the brokenness of human life, is by changing on the inside. Now, I just add a little bit to the idea here, and that is we have to act in order for that to happen. And what this series is about, more than anything else, is what we can do. And we'll get into that tonight, and we'll talk about it. The things that we can do. Change is not passive. Change is active. And there are things that will absolutely work to change you, no matter what the issue is. Let me just begin with this statement, that everything that is promised in the Scriptures about life in God is possible. And it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And just look at 1 Corinthians 13, for example. Listen to these words. You don't need to look. You know it. Just listen to them. Love is patient. Love is kind. And it is not jealous. Love does not brag. It is not arrogant. It doesn't act like a jerk. That's what it's talking about. If you say, it doesn't act unbecomingly, or the old version, doth not behave itself unseemly. Right? No, it doesn't act like a jerk. Doesn't seek its own. Is not provoked easily. Doesn't keep count of wrongs. Bears all things. Believes all things. Now, see, what I'm saying to you is, that's for you. That's for me. Now, it doesn't say I do it. And if you think you're going to do that, you're in real trouble. It says love does it. So now what are we to do? We are to receive love into our lives. And we can do that. Now, we can't do it without God, but we don't have to. We're not waiting on God. He's ready. So now the question that really comes to us is, would we feel safe being like that? That's an honest shrug. Because the truth of the matter is, when we think about these things that are presented in the Scriptures, when we really think about them, I think most of us, at least until we get into it very well, aren't really sure we want that. Do I really want to bear all things? That's a challenge, isn't it? That's a challenge. And we have to have a vision of God that would allow us to be enthusiastic about that. And we have to be able to answer the question, what's going to happen to me if I do that? Okay? And that's where the main change on the inside has to occur. Because that question, what's going to happen to me, is the universal human question. And the only answer to it is given through the Scriptures and the Son of God who came and let it happen to him. Now, by the way, this is a teaching session, so I may stop occasionally to give you a chance to think. Is that okay? And I'm so glad we have a question and answer, because, that's really where the work often gets done. I had someone at a conference the other day who said, let's have the question and answer first. Well, maybe you'd really get to it faster if you did it that way. So now, if you do have, because, I'm too old to talk to movements and multitudes. I just talk to individuals. So I'm here to talk to you and to try to be of help to you on this issue of the healing of the heart. So there's going to be a lot of content here. And actually, I think maybe I'll bring, if I can get my PowerPoint to working, I think I may bring handouts anyway, because it's harder to get it off the screen, and I'd like for you to be able to take it home with you and worry about it and think about it, Because really the thing I'm saying to you is this, that all of the wonderful stuff that we see in the Scriptures is there for us. We simply have to find the way in. And that's what I'm going to be talking about, is finding the way in. We have to understand what to do in order for this change on the inside to happen. And so, if you look at your first page there, or the big print, the little prints on the back, you'll see the outline of the series. And so we're going to teach very carefully, I hope, on these topics. And tonight the issue is how our hearts and lives are broken and the promise of healing. We want to look at that very thoroughly, because we have to understand the brokenness. We use that word a lot today, and it's a good word. But I think sometimes we don't really understand it. And so we're going to spend about the first half of our discussion tonight just talking about that. And then tomorrow or next week, understanding the will and the mind. Because, you see, the change comes with a change of how our will is set and what's in our mind. So now, if we want that change on the inside, we have to take steps with that. And we can do that. And it isn't a killing thing. Actually, I'm going to talk about that some towards the end tonight, just to get you started. But the will is central. And the will is really the heart. And the broken heart is really a broken will. And when something is broken, it's non-functional, isn't it? When your kid has a toy and it's broken. What does that mean? It means you don't work. And that's the story on human life. Something broken. And fundamentally it's the will, but the will works off the mind. And what's in your mind has a tremendous influence over your will. Partly because your mind works on your feelings. And your feelings is the interface between your will and the world. And that's why when you get up in the morning and you say to your friend or your family member, "How are you feeling?" You don't say, "How are you thinking?" You say, "How are you feeling?" Because you know that that's right up front. And so the next week is out of the furnace of feeling, escaping the tyranny of feeling, passion, and emotion. See, you remember that Paul says in Galatians 5, "They that are Christ have crucified the passions, the lusts, the affections." We have to put them on the cross. That doesn't mean they're dead, you know. People stay alive for a while after they're crucified. But what it does mean is they're not running wild, right? Because the guy who's crucified isn't running down the alley. So now I have to talk about feelings. And then we have to talk about the body, because our body is intended to be the temple of God. But for the ordinary person who is not healed, the body is running their life. And it's interacting in a social context that I don't want to get started on tonight because I want to talk about later. But the social context and the body has to be healed. And the body is inside, believe me. It's not just outside, it's inside. And the social world, the relationships to others that we have. So we've been talking about the family especially, because the family is so crucial in forming the body, of course, isn't it? I mean, that's where bodies come from. And then forming the social context. And then just quickly, the next section will be on the restoration of the soul. We're going to look at the 23rd Psalm some tonight. You remember the phrase, "He restoreth my soul." And then the sixth week, we'll be talking about the wholeness of life in the kingdom and power of God. And that's going to be mainly time for questions and answers. We're going to really try to make it workshop. And I hope that if you manage to stick with us to that point, that you will come with your hardest questions, the things that seem most difficult to you. And I haven't the slightest idea that I have an answer to them. Right? But I wouldn't be up here if I wasn't trusting God. Right? So perhaps God will have an answer. I don't even know yet. Sometimes I don't know it until after I say it. And see, that's how God works. And we may come up on something nobody has an answer to, and we'll just have to say, this is something we've got to work on. But take notes, keep your questions, and I believe we'll find a lot that we can do to make that change me on the inside reality. Now, so let's start with brokenness, and the source of our brokenness is one simple thing. And you know, when I say this word, I'm going to be surprised if many of you don't say, you know, that can't be right. But that's okay. That's okay. We're here to, that's what happens when you really start working on stuff. You don't immediately agree. But let me just say there is one source of human brokenness, and that is self-will. That's where it all comes from. Now, please don't feel guilty or defensive. Guilt is one of the least profitable emotions imaginable. Guilt is real. That's a real thing, not just a feeling. But you can't really make progress by pushing that button. What we want is understanding. Understanding. And now what I'm saying is that when you look at the human scene generally, you look back down to history, go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, and when you look at all the calamities that befall people, and you look into families, which is the primary source of continued human brokenness is the family. Now that doesn't mean we're going to get rid of it, because we don't have anything better. But we can improve that. And brokenness comes to the family. And in the family, what causes so much grief is simply self-will. Now, self-will is a matter of saying, I must have my way, no matter what. That's what self-will is. It's not will. You got to have will, and will is a good thing. There used to be talk of breaking the will as a process of discipline for young people. And it's an unfortunate thing, because very often it meant domination by a will that was not broken, but needed to be. And so very often that was the father. And the father could become a tyrant and might try to make it look righteous by saying, well, I'm just breaking my children's will. And so we have to be careful with that. Will is a good thing. Don't think that the will itself is bad. It's good. God gave it to us. The will is basically our capacity to bring things about, to initiate courses of actions and events that bring things about. And in all areas of life, it's vital. It is our creative aspect. God created us as creators. And that's very important to understand. And all of our life should be a process of continual creation. And I think actually that's what we're going to be doing for eternity. It's one reason why the universe is so big, so you'll have enough room for you, right, to be created. And it's very big, and it's very good. But the will of individuals and groups to get what they want, regardless of what it does to others, is what continually destroys life, breaks people up. And it becomes quite complicated. Because of this, we live in a world of disappointment, insufficiency, injury, and hurt, mental, emotional, physical, and social, with scarred and dysfunctional, pain-filled souls and bodies. And one of the saddest things is what happens to children in this world. And it's universal. It takes different forms in different places. But children have to come to terms with the reality of the world they live in. And Jesus, you recall, was very stern about this. He said, if you offend a little child, it'd be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the ocean. Thank God somebody in the universe takes this seriously, you know. And you remember Jesus said in Matthew 18 that of children, that their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. And what that means is every little child, including the ones you see in the Sudan or India or wherever you see suffering children, every one of those is personally cared for by God. And I just pause so you can think about that, because I want to enlarge on that later about God. Because we want to get beyond the brokenness and begin to see the promise that comes from God. Here's some wonderful words by Henry Vaughan about being a child. He's talking about when on some gilded cloud or flower my gazing soul would dwell an hour, and in those weaker glories spy some shadow of eternity. Before I taught my tongue to wound my conscience with a sinful sound, or had the black art to dispense a several sin to every sense, but felt through all this fleshly dress bright shoots of everlastingness. Little children, they can escape the brokenness sometimes if they're welcomed and if they're in the presence of parents who are not themselves at the mercy of their brokenness and are able to make a place of love and generosity and beauty for the child. And that's one of the most gorgeous things in all of creation, is to see a child like that, don't you know? And Jesus wasn't just whistling Dixie when he said you have to repent and become like a little child, or you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And we need to give a lot of thought to that when we're talking about this kind of transformation. Well, because of how this develops, our lives are characterized by thoughts and feelings of deficiency. I won't quite do. Of desertion. No one really cares about me. So I have to do everything I can to manage them, right? And even that, you think, isn't really going to work. Dread. Many of our lives are just filled with dread. Dread to see morning come, dread to think I have to go back to that job, dread sickness, dread financial failure, dread growing old. And death. Right? So that's how the brokenness spells itself out. It's one of the great gifts of healing that comes from Jesus, is his assurance that those who know him and love his word will never experience death. And they'll never experience desertion. And that they are sufficient in God, and that there's really nothing to dread. You believe that? Can you? I mean, now, you know, is that really in there? Because you see, if you really dread nothing because of your knowledge of God, well, then you're moving out of brokenness. And you say you don't think anymore about how deficient you might be, because you know where your sufficiency is. Right? And you know, as Jesus said, I'm with you always. As God said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. In Hebrews 12 and 13, there's a wonderful discussion about there, how we're seeking a city that is not made with hands, a kingdom that can't be shaken. But if you don't have that, and you know, we really do want to recognize that just profession of faith in Jesus doesn't bring that. Can we be honest about that? Now, there's no reason why it should. It was never meant to. See, what we're talking, the healing of brokenness, overcoming the brokenness, comes from a path of discipleship to Jesus, not just faith in him. And we have to recognize that we have a form of Christianity today that accepts that and says, well, you can have faith in Christ and not change. You can have faith in Christ and not be a disciple. But see, if you don't accept that discipleship, then you certainly will not change, because the change comes as a process of disciple. Now we use that word a lot. What is a disciple? A disciple is an apprentice. If I'm your disciple, I'm learning from you how to be like you. And in order to do that, I have to be with you. Right? That's what disciple, it's apprenticeship. And I like the word apprenticeship because it has that practical aspect to it. We still have that in some of the trades, don't we? Apprentice. And now, please try to think about your faith in Jesus as confidence in him. And understand that when you have confidence in him, not just something he did or something he said, you have confidence in him and you believe he's right. And you believe what he does is good. And you want to be in on it. So everything he said and everything he did, that says, wow, I want to learn how to do that. How do you do that? See, you know, if you're an apprentice in plumbing or any of the trades, yeah, that's changing on the inside also, isn't it? Right? I mean, you're developing a capacity, a feeling, a set of ideas, a set of the will, and you can do what needs to be done without thinking about it. Right? Now that's apprenticeship. That's real learning. And you change on the inside, and your character becomes that of a plumber. Now, as far as it goes, that's pretty good. You need more than that. But that's pretty good. And a good plumber is a good thing. Right? Where's Jorge? A good plumber is a good thing. And it's character. And it comes down to things like, how far do you tighten the pipe? Well, not too much and not too little, just right. Now, who knows how to do that? The person who on the inside is a plumber. Now, who knows how not to envy? Well, someone who has learned how. They have gone through the process with Jesus, and they have learned. Now, what is envy? Well, envy is resentment of someone because they have something you don't. That's what envy is. And it's actually a Siamese twin with covetousness. So now, could one live without envy? What do you think? Let's take a vote. Could you live without envy? Yes, you could, couldn't you? Yes, you could. But you're going to have to, that's going to have to change, that will change your attitude towards yourself and others. And I'm going to cut this short on this point because we'll maybe have time to talk about it later. But, for example, the person who knows what they have in their life in God's world doesn't feel unhappy because someone else has something good. It's a deprived person who is troubled with envy. So how do you get out of deprivation? That's where the training comes. Now, I know I'm going over this and just talking like it's just easy as falling off of a log backward. Right? But it's a process that involves some really difficult moves. And you remember that, for example, Pilate understood that the people who were trying to get Jesus dead was doing it because they envied him. Now remember, he had something they didn't have, which was power with the people. They had authority, but everyone hated them. They loved Jesus. They thought he was wonderful. You remember once they sent some people to arrest him, and they came back and said, nobody talks like this guy. Nobody talks like him. See? And now what did those folks in authority think? They said, we're going to kill him. Because he's got something we want and we can't get. You see, they were really operating out of deficiency. So now, this would be screen 6 if we had a screen. Okay? And it says, we see ourselves forced to take charge of our life and world in whatever way we can, resulting in further injuries and disappointments to ourselves and others. See, that's in the situation of deprivation and deficiency and so on and disappointment. We say, I must take charge. I must. Now that was, remember that's what Satan said to Eve, isn't it? You better take charge, because God is not going to look out for you. In fact, he's going to deprive you of something good. See, that's the general form of temptation. And as we live our lives and as we grow up and as we, unfortunately, very few children have really the kind of early years that they have. Some do, and it's a beautiful thing to see, but as they grow up and they go out into the world, they have to face a dreadful thing called recess. Isn't that right? Yeah. And recess is full of bad stuff. I used to talk about someone who got an A for recess, but I thought that was good if you got an A for recess. Because, you have all those, some very young bullies. And they're just right here, you see. They're taking charge. They're taking charge of you, right? And now, of course, when I was a kid, they didn't have guns. It was fist. Fisticuffs. You know that word? They don't do fisticuffs anymore, do they? They shoot you. Right? See? But, I mean, it's the same story. It's exactly the same story. Happens in boardrooms, penthouses, government offices, all kinds of places. People taking charge, and that means charge of you. Right? So Machiavelli long ago had this elaborate discussion. Is it better for the ruler to be hated or loved? Feared or loved? And his answer was, better to be feared. See, that's what this is about. That's a reflection of the world. People taking charge. And it's a terrible thing that just goes through all of our worldly reality. We live in this broken world. And it results in people who are incapable of doing the good they intend to do. People generally desperately want to be good. I've never met a person who didn't want to be good. Never. And I've said that in front of audiences in many parts of the world, and I often say it in front of my classes at USC. I've never met anyone who doesn't want to be good. Desperately. But I've also never met anyone who wasn't ready to do evil. And to give you an explanation why, being a good person, it's necessary for them to do that. Right? And where does that come from? That comes from self-will. I must have, you name it. I must have that. Now, I remember, will is not bad. Self-will means I must have my way no matter what happens. And that's bad. Because that's putting oneself in the place of God. That's why Paul says covetousness is idolatry. And guess who's the God in that case? C'est moi. I am. And that's why it seems would be quite a good thing for me to take from someone else what they have, since I want it. Covetousness is a major part of the picture of brokenness. And the pattern we fall into then is one of moral failure, lack of peace and joy, contentment, little or no productivity of good. And the good that we intend to do escapes our hand, and very rarely do we have anyone who feels like they have succeeded to the extent that they should. Now, the biblical passages on this, I refer here in your notes to Galatians 5, 17 through 21, and to Mark 7. In Mark 7, you remember, Jesus says, "For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, adulteries, deeds of coveting and wickedness, as well as deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness." You ever seen anyone like that? Not me, of course, but I've seen people like that, haven't you? And in Galatians, Paul was just a master of understanding these things. And he puts it very clearly here in Galatians. He says, verse 17, "For the flesh sets its desires against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, for these are in opposition to one another, so that you may not do the things you please." In other words, the things you want to do, you can't do them. Now why? Well, because you're broken. Now, of course, something, you want a drink of water, you can normally get that. But when you think about your life as a whole, what kind of person do I want to be? Am I the kind of person I want to be? Am I genuinely full of joy and peace? Or am I just hanging on by my toenails? And you might say, well, you don't know my circumstances, or you wouldn't be talking about this. Right? Now, see, that's, I guess, the nail we need to hit the hardest, is that circumstances do not determine joy and peace and happiness and contentment. And then we think about the good we would like to do in life. Everyone wants to do good in their life, and that's as it should be. It starts very early. A little child wants to create, and then when you come down to the end, we say things like, well, I'd like to leave the world a better place. Isn't that true? Wouldn't you like to do that? Yes. Again, I mean, you have to really have been twisted up to say, boy, I really like to leave this a worse place. I just want to see this a worse place than when I got here. I mean, it's very hard to imagine anyone saying that, isn't it? Right? Yeah. And that reflects the deep reality of who we are. But because of this brokenness inside that comes from self-will, complicated by our education, by the history of the world that lies back of us. Right? I mean, if you're born in Afghanistan, you got a load. Well, actually, you have one in Reseda. It's a different one. You see, all of that history, all of that education, the years of practice, how our family has developed, all of that adds in, you see, and then we wind up. You know, I was thinking the other day, for much of my younger life, I just assumed I was going to have to lead a hidden life. I just assumed that I was going to have to hide myself from people. And you know who the Wizard of Oz is, don't you? It's me. I'm putting out all that smoke and all those sounds, you see, and I'm here behind the curtain. Could it be you? See, because of the brokenness we develop a place to hide. And actually, it's in our bodies. One of the main things that our bodies allows us to do is to hide from others. That's a shocking thing. I quote you Shakespeare. God has given you one face, and you make yourself another one. Okay. So now, that's the picture of human brokenness. And just very quickly, we want to recognize that God is always reaching out. God is always trying to find the human being in their brokenness. And it's hard for us to believe somehow that He could actually love everyone, but He does.